On more than one occasion, the churches he had founded looked to Paul to decide whether this or that was true. It seems obvious that Paul was a great teacher, and that they trusted him to know the correct answer. What probably surprised them is how often Paul did not simply choose A or B as the correct answer, but instead he used those occasions as a teaching tool to come up with C, something that they had not considered at all. Such is the case described in Paul's letter to the Corinthians, chapter 8. The issue seems simple. Can a Christian believer eat food that has been offered up on an altar to one of the many Greek gods? Has that food been tainted in some way by its ritual use? There were those in the community who argued that since they knew that there was only one God, then there was no sin in consuming this food. There were others, however, who argued that eating this food was also an act of worship and gave praise to the deity to whom it had been offered. Commerce and religion mixed freely within the marketplace in Corinth. And it may well be true that practically all the meat in the markets of Corinth came from these daily sacrifices to one idol or another. So you could end up eating this meat without even knowing it. So what then should a Christian believer do? While we may think that this has little to do with us anymore, remember that when you are eating pork chops, you probably shouldn't offer to share them with your Jewish friends. And during the season of Lent, you could easily run into someone who has decided, for both reasons of faith and or health, to forego certain foods. The connection between food and faith remains a part of our life even today. Why else would we say grace before a meal? When Paul learned of this problem in Corinth, he could have easily sided with those who claimed that their knowledge and sophistication made it okay for them to eat such meat that came from the altars, and he almost seemed to do so. We know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, he wrote, and that there is no God but one, and there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. So their faith in the one God itself rendered the act of eating such meat totally harmless to them. After all, they always gave thanks to the one and only God. Not everyone, however, would see what they are doing in the same way. Be careful, Paul told them, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to others. In the history of our conference, in the Four Corners of New Mexico, a similar sort of conflict played out. Some Navajo believers there were asked to attend and participate in traditional Native American ceremonies, and they refused, saying that the cross and the feather should have nothing to do with each other. Other Navajo Christians saw the situation in the light of their knowledge that there was only one God, and so they felt they could safely attend these events without sacrificing their faith. The ultimate showdown did not go well. Those on both sides of the issue refused to budge. In the end, those who saw no harm in also recognizing their Native American culture were effectively driven out by those who strongly believed that any such activity could weaken the faith of some believers, especially those who were new to the Christian faith. That situation, like the situation in Corinth, needed a different sort of resolution. The key is in the first 3 verses of this passage in 1 Corinthians. We all possess knowledge, Paul wrote, but knowledge puffs up, while love builds up. Those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know, but whoever loves God is known by God. What we learn from this passage is that we can be fully right, but also wrong at the same time, if what we are doing is not done in love. The only way to be 100% wrong all of the time is not to make loving one another important. Unless you do that, even if you are factually correct, you are still wrong. That is the gist of the advice that Paul gave them, and it can be applied to a lot of human conflicts. The 3rd verse in this passage can actually be translated in a number of different ways. The literal translation of the Greek kind of says, If, moreover, someone loves God, this one knows and is known by it. Some version of whoever loves God is known by God. That is the most common translation, which assumes that it is referring to God. A few existing texts, however, change the wording just a little bit, which suggests that a better translation might be, whoever loves truly knows. I like that. It captures the idea that maybe even when we think we know everything, we may not know what we really need to know, which is how to love one another as God has loved us. Without that knowledge, we don't have any answers that matter. Paul, in his role as judge and arbiter of this matter, saw this dilemma as a moral question. They had every right to do as they pleased. But if someone with a weak conscience sees you, with all your knowledge, eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? Paul said. So this weak brother or sister, for whom Christ died, is destroyed by your knowledge. The sin was not in eating this food, but in not caring how doing this might affect others. And Paul was clear that when you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. So to apply all this to our present day, you have the absolute right to say whatever you want, but you also have the absolute responsibility to be careful not to hurt others with your words. You have the absolute right in our society to do anything that is not outright illegal, but you also have the absolute responsibility to be careful about how what you do affects others. You have the absolute right to pursue happiness in whatever way you want, but not to ruin someone else's pursuit of happiness in the process. For the Christian believer, every choice has to be framed by the way that God has loved us. And therefore, the way that we treat others matters, because that matters to God. Paul himself made a personal choice. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall. The only constraint that made him do this was love. And the only constraint that he placed upon other believers in Corinth was to always make love a part of their decisions, a part of how they live. His words helped diffuse what could have been a serious division within the church. His words still call us to make all of our choices based upon loving our neighbor. Interpreters and translators may quibble with me here, but maybe both translations of Paul's words are true. Those who love God are also loved by God, and whoever loves truly knows everything they ever need to know. Be safe, and God bless you.